Okay, let's dive in. Sometimes it feels like managing an ABA organization or supervising staff is like herding cats, right? I mean, everyone kind of knows what good work should look like,
Uh-huh.
but like getting everyone on the same page with the exact expectations,
Yeah.
that's the real challenge, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think that's a really common challenge that people run into. And it's not just about things running smoothly. Defining those responsibilities clearly, it's super important for ethical and effective ABA practice.
Right.
We really owe it to the clients, to the staff, and to ourselves to make those expectations super clear.
Absolutely. So how do we do that? Well, that's exactly what we're going to deep dive into today. We've got Chapter 3 of the Supervisor's Guidebook.
Oh, nice.
And this chapter, it really digs into the details of how to specify those responsibilities.
Yeah, it jumps right into something pretty interesting. It says you can't really expect staff to hit a target if they can't see it.
That's a good point.
If your team isn't 100% sure what their responsibilities are, then how can they actually fulfill them? It's like sending them on a scavenger hunt, but they don't have a list.
Oh, for sure. That reminds me of the situation early in my career. I was training a new staff member on a behavior intervention plan. And I told them to, be proactive about challenging behavior.
Oh, good.
Now I was thinking proactive means anticipating triggers and intervening early.
Oh, I bet I can guess what happened.
They waited for the behavior to happen and then reacted quickly, which obviously that's not the proactive approach I was looking for.
Right.
And it really made me realize how the same word can have totally different meanings to different people.
It's such a good example because it shows how important these clear definitions are, especially in ABA where, those little differences in interpretation can have a big impact on the clients.
For sure.
The chapter breaks down this whole idea of specifying responsibilities into 3 main criteria, which I think is super helpful. And the first one, it really stood out to me. It says, each responsibility should be described in terms of actual observable staff work behavior.
Okay.
So we ditch those vague concepts and we really zero in on the actions.
So instead of saying something general like show initiative, we'd say something specific like, when you see a client struggling with a task, offer assistance before they become frustrated.
Yes.
That's something you can actually observe, right?
Exactly. And the book gives this other great example. It's about offering choices to a client during mealtime.
Okay.
So instead of just saying offer choices, it goes into detail about exactly how the staff should present those choices to the client and then how to actually recognize the client's choice, even if they can't communicate verbally.
Wow. So it's like painting a picture with words so everyone's on the same page.
Exactly.
The second criterion then is that these work behaviors, they have to be directly observable, right? So like you should be able to actually see whether or not the staff member is doing what's expected. No more guesswork.
Yeah, this is so important for supervision. So you can be consistent and fair.
Yeah.
We have to be able to evaluate how the staff are doing based on what we see and not just our own, subjective impressions.
Right. So we've got the observable actions and then consistent observations of those actions. What's that third criterion?
Okay, so the third one emphasizes agreement on what's happening.
Yeah.
Imagine you have a bunch of people observing the same staff member. Would they all agree on whether or not that staff member is actually fulfilling that responsibility? That's what we want because it means our evaluations are reliable and it's not just one person's opinion.
Gotcha. So these criteria all make a lot of sense. But how do we actually put them into practice? Like, how do we actually go about specifying those responsibilities in a, concrete way?
Yeah, so the chapter talks about 2 main strategies. The first is performance checklists, and the second is work activity schedules.
Checklists. Those are pretty straightforward, right? I use them all the time.
That's why they're so popular, they're practical, and they're easy to use. The book uses the simple example of a checklist for cleaning a porch.
Okay.
It seems basic, but breaking it down into steps like remove the trash, arrange the furniture, sweep the floor, water the plants, it makes it so much easier to make sure everything gets done properly.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But how does that translate to something more complex? Like in an ABA setting, the tasks are way more involved.
Yeah, definitely. So let's say you're running a discrete trial training session.
Okay.
You could create a checklist that includes all the steps, like gather the materials, arrange the client's chair, present the instruction clearly, deliver the reinforcement, record the data, all those little details.
Oh, I see. So even those seemingly simple tasks can benefit from that extra level of clarity. It's like having a roadmap for the staff to follow.
Exactly. And it helps minimize errors. It ensures consistency. And it allows you to give feedback and supervise more effectively, too. It really streamlines the whole process. Now let's talk about work activity schedules.
Okay.
These go a step further than checklists because they don't just tell you what to do, they also tell you when to do it, where to do it, and who to do it with.
I can see how that would be especially helpful in ABA.
Yeah.
We're always dealing with these dynamic environments, and each client's needs can change so much throughout the day.
Absolutely. So think about it. You have a schedule that outlines exactly when and where each therapy session is happening, who's responsible for each client, and what materials they need. It's like a detailed roadmap for the entire day.
I like how the book gives that example of a work activity schedule for a group instruction on how to fold a table napkin.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
It breaks down all the staff members involved, their roles as the lead instructor and the co-instructor, the time, the location, and even lists the specific duties for each role.
I like that example because it really shows you how much potential confusion you can avoid when every little detail of the task is carefully planned out. The book even mentions how helpful this kind of schedule can be when you have staff covering for each other, or if they're working in a setting they're not familiar with.
That makes sense.
It ensures that things stay consistent for the clients, even when there are staffing changes.
That's a good point. But I'm thinking, couldn't all of this detailed instruction and scheduling make the staff feel kind of micromanaged?
Oh, that's a valid concern. Nobody wants to feel like they have zero autonomy, right?
Right.
That's where the book brings up the idea of participative supervision. It emphasizes how important it is to get the staff involved in defining their own responsibilities.
I'll admit, I'm a little hesitant about that. As a supervisor, it can be tempting to think, well, I know what needs to get done, so I'll just tell everyone. But the book makes a pretty strong case for involving the staff more, doesn't it?
Yeah, and there's a lot of research to back that up, too. Staff tend to be more engaged and more satisfied with their jobs when they feel like they're being heard and their opinions matter. It really encourages them to take ownership of their work and to feel more invested in those positive outcomes for the clients.
I can see how that would be true.
Yeah.
I mean, the people who are doing the work every single day probably have some really valuable insights into what works and what doesn't.
Exactly. And the book even suggests some really practical ways that you can gather that input from your staff, like having brainstorming sessions or sending out feedback surveys. Personally, I've had a lot of success with brainstorming sessions.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, you get everyone together in a room and you talk about what's working well, what could be improved, and how you can make those expectations crystal clear. It often leads to some really creative solutions and a much stronger sense of shared ownership.
I like that. So it sounds like we're talking about shifting away from that you're being told what to do kind of approach and moving towards a more collaborative way of figuring out how to achieve those shared goals.
That's a great way to put it. It's about creating that sense of ownership and empowerment. When the staff have a say in how their work is defined, they're much more likely to embrace those responsibilities and really put their best effort into fulfilling them.
Right.
Plus, they're much more likely to give you valuable feedback that can actually make things even better for everyone.
Yeah, that makes sense. This all sounds really good in theory, but being realistic, doesn't this kind of collaborative approach end up creating more work for the supervisor in the long run?
It's true that participative supervision requires a little bit of a shift in mindset and some effort up front, but think of it as an investment.
Okay.
The long-term benefits definitely outweigh that initial time commitment, When your staff feel like they're being heard and respected, they're naturally going to be more engaged, more motivated, and more committed to their work.
And that can lead to better outcomes for the clients. Reduce staff turnover. And just a more positive work environment in general.
Exactly. And the book even points out some common job aspects that staff almost always consider really important. Things like their work schedules, their client assignments, break times, covering for colleagues when they're absent, overtime, and any special assignments
Oh, yeah, of course.
Those are all areas where just getting their input can make a huge difference in morale and their willingness to buy into those responsibilities.
I can see how addressing those issues collaboratively could really strengthen the whole team environment. But aren't there times when a supervisor just has to make a decision and move forward without getting input from the staff? I mean, you can't realistically involve everyone in every single decision.
You're absolutely right. The book talks about finding that balance between providing clear direction as a supervisor and empowering your staff. It suggests focusing on the responsibilities that are most critical to client outcomes. For example, if you're implementing a brand new behavior intervention plan, it's really important to get input from the staff on how you're going to implement it on a day-to-day basis.
Because they're the ones working directly with the client, right?
Exactly. Their insights are going to be super valuable in those situations. And also, Think about any areas where unclear expectations could actually hinder the client's progress.
Gotcha.
So, for instance, if paperwork is taking up too much time and cutting into therapy sessions, wouldn't it make sense to get the staff involved in finding ways to streamline that paperwork process?
Yeah, that's a great example. You're using their expertise to benefit everyone.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot. Remember, involving the staff doesn't mean you have to give up control as a supervisor.
This kind of reminds me of something we talked about earlier about staff really accepting their responsibilities.
Yeah.
If you involve them in that process of defining those responsibilities, they're more likely to see them as tools for success rather than restrictions. It's a win-win situation.
You're exactly right. When you think about it, it's really similar to the benefits of clearly defining those responsibilities in the first place. It benefits the clients, the staff, and the supervisors. It's the foundation of ethical and fulfilling ABA practice.
For sure. But there are still going to be those times when somebody might feel a little boxed in by having those duties spelled out so clearly.
Oh, of course. And that's understandable. That's where, again, participative supervision can be so powerful. Because instead of just handing them a list of responsibilities, you're engaging them in a collaborative process to figure out the best way to reach those shared goals that you've all agreed on.
It's like that saying, give a man a fish, and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, and you feed him for a lifetime.
I love that analogy. It really highlights how we, as supervisors, can go beyond just directing people and become mentors and facilitators.
Yeah, I like that. So we've covered a lot about involving staff. As we start to wrap up our deep dive into this, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember about specifying staff responsibilities?
I think the most important message is that clarity equals kindness.
Oh, I like that.
When we really take the time to define those expectations, involve the staff, and provide ongoing support and feedback, we're not just creating a workplace that runs more efficiently, we're creating a whole culture of respect, collaboration, and a shared commitment to the well-being of our clients, and that's what makes ABA so rewarding and impactful.
That's a powerful thought, you know. Clarity equals kindness. It's so easy to get caught up in being efficient and forget about how we're actually communicating those expectations to our staff.
Yeah, definitely. And when we approach supervision with that mindset of kindness and collaboration, it can make such a difference in the whole work environment.
For sure. So as we're wrapping up this deep dive on specifying staff responsibilities, I'm wondering about some of the challenges supervisors might face when they're actually trying to implement these ideas. We've talked about all the benefits, but let's be real. It's not always going to be smooth sailing.
Yeah, you're right. It definitely doesn't happen overnight. One of the biggest challenges I've seen is pushback from staff who are just resistant to change.
I can see that.
They might be really used to a more hands-off kind of approach and feel like these CLE definitions are too restrictive.
Especially if they've been doing things a certain way for a long time,
Exactly. And it's important to keep in mind that any kind of change takes time and effort, right?
Right.
We have to be patient and consistent with our approach, but also be open to feedback and willing to adjust things if they're not working.
Didn't the book have some advice on how to deal with that resistance from staff?
Yeah, it did. And it all boils down to communication and collaboration, which we've talked about a lot today. So before you implement any big changes, take the time to really explain why you're doing it.
Okay.
Explain the rationale behind moving towards more clearly defined responsibilities and how it's actually going to benefit everyone in the long run.
So instead of just saying, this is how we're doing things now, you're helping them understand the reasons behind it.
Exactly. And don't forget to involve the staff in the process as much as you can. Ask for their input, really listen to their concerns, and be willing to compromise. When staff feel like they're a part of finding the solution, they're so much more likely to buy into it.
Okay, that makes sense. So the key takeaway here is that to implement these strategies effectively, supervisors need strong communication skills, empathy, and the willingness to be flexible.
You got it. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. We're all constantly learning and growing as supervisors.
This has been such a helpful deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much from our conversation today. As we wrap up, what final thoughts would you like to leave our listeners with as they're thinking about specifying staff responsibilities in their own workplaces?
I think the most important thing to remember is that this isn't just a box to check off your to-do list. Clearly defining staff responsibilities is an ongoing process that takes constant communication, collaboration, and a genuine commitment to creating a work environment where everyone feels valued, supported, and empowered to do their best work. That's what ultimately allows us to provide the best services to our clients.
That's a fantastic point. I love that. It's a good reminder that at the core of ABA is this dedication to helping others. And when we create a supportive and clearly defined work environment, we're really setting everyone up for success.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today on the Deep Dive. It's been a pleasure. I hope our listeners found this exploration of staff responsibilities helpful and maybe even a little bit inspiring. And remember, we always love to hear from you. So share your own experiences and strategies for specifying staff responsibilities in the comments below. Until next time, happy supervising.